1987. Somewhere backstage at a major music industry event, Michael Hutchence is about to meet his idol. Not just any idol, Prince, the man who'd revolutionized what it meant to be a performer, who'd turned sexuality and artistry into a single, unstoppable force, who'd fought his record label for creative control and won. Michael has studied Prince's career the way a theology student studies scripture. He knows every album, every controversy, every boundary Prince has pushed, and now he's about to stand face to face with him. Michael is 27 years old, on the verge of massive global success with the Kick album about to drop. Prince is 29, at the absolute peak of his powers, having just come off the Sign of the Times album. Two performers who understood something fundamental about stage presence, about charisma, about using your sexuality as artistic expression. What did Prince say to Michael Hutchence during that backstage encounter? And how did those words shape the way Michael approached the next decade of his career, right up until that hotel room in Sydney in 1997? Let me start with why Prince mattered so much to Michael. Because this wasn't casual fandom. This was deep artistic admiration bordering on obsession. Michael discovered Prince's music in the early 80s, probably around the 1999 album era. By the time Purple Rain exploded in 1984, Michael was completely captivated. Here was an artist who refused every limitation the music industry tried to impose. Prince played multiple instruments, wrote all his own material, produced his own records, directed his own videos, controlled every aspect of his artistic output. And he did it all while being unapologetically sexual in a way that challenged everyone's assumptions. What fascinated Michael specifically was how Prince used sexuality on stage. It wasn't crude or one-dimensional. It was sophisticated, provocative, dangerous. Prince would wear high heels and lace and makeup, completely gender-fluid before that term even existed. He'd make eye contact with audience members in ways that felt intimate and confrontational. He'd move with this feline grace that was both masculine and feminine, and somehow it all worked. He wasn't trying to be a traditional rock star. He was creating something entirely his own. Michael saw parallels to what he wanted to do with INXS. He didn't want to be just another frontman doing the standard rock god poses. He wanted to bring something more complex, more sensual, more challenging to the stage. And Prince was showing him it was possible. You could be sexual without being sleazy. You could be provocative without being offensive. You could challenge gender norms and audience expectations and still sell millions of records. Prince was proof that the rules could be broken if you were talented enough and bold enough. By 1987, both artists were in interesting positions. Prince had just released Sign of the Times, which many consider his masterpiece. He was at the height of his creative powers, completely in control of his vision, making exactly the music he wanted to make. INXS was about to release Kick in October of that year, the album that would make them global superstars. Michael was confident but still hungry, still proving himself on the international stage. The dynamic between them was student and master, even though they were only 2 years apart in age. The meeting happened at a music industry event, most likely the MTV Video Music Awards or a similar gathering where both artists would have been present. The exact date and location have been reported slightly differently in various accounts, but what's consistent is that it happened in 1987, that it happened backstage, and that it made a profound impression on Michael. According to people who were there, Michael was noticeably nervous beforehand, which was unusual for him. He was normally confident, even cocky in social situations, but this was Prince. This was different. When they were introduced, Prince was cordial but reserved, which was his typical demeanor with people he didn't know well. He had a reputation for being quiet, for observing more than talking, for being intensely private despite his provocative public persona. But something about Michael interested him. Maybe it was recognizing a kindred spirit, another performer who understood the power of stage presence and sexual charisma. Maybe Prince had seen INXS's videos and recognized talent. Whatever the reason, instead of the brief handshake and polite conversation that characterized most backstage celebrity encounters, Prince actually engaged with Michael. They talked about performance, about what it means to command a stage. Prince told Michael something that stuck with him forever. According to Michael's later recollections and interviews, Prince said something along the lines of, "The stage is where you tell the truth. Everything else is compromise. When you're performing, that's the only time you're completely free. Don't waste it trying to be what people expect." That idea, that the stage was a space of freedom and truth, resonated deeply with Michael. He'd already been feeling that instinctively, but hearing it articulated by someone he admired so much gave him permission to pursue it more boldly. Prince also talked to Michael about image control. This was something Prince was legendary for. He'd fought Warner Brothers, his record label, tooth and nail for ownership of his masters and creative control. He'd changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol to protest his contract. He'd refused to compromise his artistic vision for commercial considerations. And he told Michael, "They'll try to make you into what they can sell. Don't let them. Figure out who you are and be that, completely, without apology." For Michael, who was about to experience massive commercial success and all the pressure that came with it, this advice was prophetic. The conversation also touched on sexuality and performance. Both men understood that their sexual charisma was a huge part of their appeal, but both also bristled at being reduced to sex symbols. Prince told Michael something like, "Your sexuality is your power, but it's not all of your power. Make sure they see everything else too." This balance between using sexuality as artistic expression and making sure people recognized your full artistry was something both men struggled with throughout their careers. Andrew Ferris witnessed parts of this interaction and later talked about how starstruck Michael was. Andrew had never seen Michael that deferential to anyone. Michael was hanging on every word Prince said, asking questions, soaking up advice. It wasn't hero worship exactly. It was more like a masterclass. Michael was learning from someone who'd already navigated the path he was about to walk. The meeting lasted maybe 20 or 30 minutes, which in the context of a busy backstage area was actually quite substantial. When it ended, Prince gave Michael some parting wisdom. He said something along the lines of, "You've got it. I can see it. Don't let anyone take it from you." Simple words, but coming from Prince, they meant everything to Michael. That validation from an artist he respected so deeply gave Michael confidence going into the kick era. In the months and years after that meeting, Michael would reference it often when talking to friends and bandmates. He'd say things like, "Prince told me this," or "Prince said that." The conversation became a touchstone for him, a reminder of artistic integrity and creative freedom. When INXS was under pressure to make Kick more commercial, Michael would push back, remembering Prince's advice about not compromising. When Michael was being treated as just a pretty face by magazines and media, he'd remember Prince saying to make sure people saw everything else too. This influence of that meeting is visible in the Kick-era videos and performances. The way Michael moved on stage became more Prince-influenced, more fluid and confident. The sexuality was more overt, but also more sophisticated. The fashion choices became bolder. Michael was applying what he'd learned from studying Prince's career, but now with the added validation of having actually received advice directly from the master. Prince and Michael crossed paths a few more times over the years at various industry events. The relationship never developed into a close friendship. Prince was too private and guarded for that, but there was mutual respect and recognition. Prince would acknowledge Michael with a nod or a brief conversation. Michael would thank him for the advice he'd given years earlier. These encounters were brief but meaningful. In the mid-90s, there were rumors of a possible collaboration between Prince and INXS, or between Prince and Michael solo. Michael mentioned in interviews that working with Prince would be a dream come true, that having Prince produce an INXS track would be incredible. But it never materialized. Schedules didn't align, or maybe Prince wasn't interested, or maybe it was just one of those things that sounds better as a possibility than a reality. We'll never know what that collaboration might have produced. By the mid-90s, both artists were dealing with different challenges. Prince was in the middle of his war with Warner Brothers, had changed his name to a symbol, was being called the artist formerly known as Prince in media coverage. He was fighting for artistic freedom and ownership of his work in a very public, very contentious way. Michael was dealing with personal turmoil, the aftermath of the Copenhagen brain injury, relationship chaos with Paula Yates, custody battles. Their paths were diverging, both struggling but in very different ways. When Michael died in November 1997, Prince was deeply affected. He didn't make a public statement, that wasn't his style, but people close to him said he took it hard. Prince had seen something special in Michael back in '87. He'd given him advice, tried to prepare him for the challenges ahead, and now Michael was gone at 37, just 8 years after that meeting. For Prince, who'd successfully navigated the treacherous waters of fame and industry pressure, Michael's death must have felt like a waste of extraordinary talent. Prince continued performing and creating for almost 20 more years after Michael's death. He eventually resolved his issues with Warner Brothers, got his masters back, proved that an artist could win against the corporate music machine. He became an elder statesman of music, respected and revered. But he never forgot the talented young Australian frontman he'd met backstage in '87. When Prince himself died in April 2016 from an accidental overdose, the parallel to Michael became impossible to ignore. Both had died in enclosed spaces, Prince in an elevator at Paisley Park, Michael in a Sydney hotel room. Both deaths involved substances and raised questions about the toll of fame and chronic pain. Both were in their 50s and 30s respectively, still with so much music left to create. Both left legacies that mixed extraordinary artistic achievement with tragic endings. The meeting between Prince and Michael in 1987 was a passing of wisdom from one generation to the next. Prince was showing Michael the path, warning him about the pitfalls, encouraging him to stay true to his artistic vision. Michael tried to follow that advice. He pushed for creative control where he could. He refused to be just a sex symbol. He used his sexuality as artistic expression rather than cheap exploitation. But the pressures Prince warned him about, the attempts to package and sell and control him, those pressures eventually contributed to the struggles that consumed Michael's final years. The advice Prince gave about the stage being the only place of complete freedom, that's poignant in retrospect, because by all accounts, performing was when Michael felt most alive, most himself. The hotel rooms, the custody battles, the media scrutiny, all of that was suffocating, but on stage, he was free. He was completely present and powerful. Prince understood that dichotomy, had experienced it himself, the stage as sanctuary, as the one place where you could be your truest self. Both artists also shared the experience of fighting to be taken seriously as musicians rather than just as sex symbols. Prince dealt with this throughout his career. Critics would focus on his provocative performances and miss the musical genius underneath. He was a virtuoso on multiple instruments, a sophisticated composer, an innovative producer, but the purple and the ruffles and the sexual performances sometimes overshadowed all of that. Michael had the exact same struggle with INXS. He was a talented vocalist with good instincts for melody and performance, but the media wanted to talk about his abs and his hair and his love life. The creative control battle was another parallel. Prince's fight with Warner Brothers became legendary, this tiny man taking on a corporate giant and eventually winning. Michael didn't have quite as dramatic a confrontation with his label, but there were tensions about creative direction, about who controlled INXS's image and sound. Prince's example showed Michael that it was possible to fight for your vision and survive, though the cost might be high. Looking at their influences on popular music, both Prince and Michael expanded what was acceptable for male performers in terms of sexuality and gender presentation. Prince made androgyny mainstream. Michael made sensuality and vulnerability masculine. They both challenged the traditional rock god archetype and created something more nuanced and interesting. Future performers, from Lenny Kravitz to Harry Styles, owe a debt to what Prince and Michael normalized. The tragedy is that both men struggled with pain, both physical and emotional, and both turned to substances to cope. Prince had chronic hip pain from years of performing in high heels, dancing intensely. He became dependent on pain medication that ultimately killed him. Michael had chronic issues from the Copenhagen brain injury, plus the emotional pain of his chaotic personal life. His substance use also contributed to his death. They were both trying to manage the toll that performing at the highest level takes on your body and psyche. If that 1987 meeting had never happened, would Michael's career have been different? Probably not drastically, but maybe in subtle ways. Prince's validation and advice gave Michael confidence to push boundaries more boldly. The Kick era's sexual provocativeness, the creative risks INXS took, some of that might have been more tentative without Prince's encouragement. The meeting mattered not because it changed Michael's fundamental trajectory, but because it reinforced his instincts and gave him permission to be bold. Michael talked about that meeting for the rest of his life. It was one of his favorite stories to tell. Meeting Prince, getting advice from him, being validated by someone he admired so deeply. Friends who knew Michael said he'd light up when he told the story, would recount every detail of what Prince said and how he said it. That meeting was a treasure for Michael, proof that he belonged in the same world as the artists he'd idolized. In interviews throughout the 90s, when Michael was asked about influences, he'd always mention Prince. Not just the music, but the approach, the philosophy, the refusal to compromise. Prince showed Michael that you could be commercially successful and artistically uncompromising at the same time. You could sell millions of records and still make the exact music you wanted to make. It was possible. Prince proved it. The parallel deaths, 9 years apart, created this eerie bookend to their connection. The student and the teacher, both gone too soon, both leaving behind extraordinary catalogs of work and questions about what might have been. Prince at 57 had more time than Michael at 37, but both felt premature. Both felt like talent that should have had decades more to create and evolve. Today, when people talk about the greatest performers in rock history, both Prince and Michael Hutchence are in the conversation. They approached it differently, came from different backgrounds, made different kinds of music, but they shared an understanding of what it meant to completely inhabit a stage, to turn performance into transcendence, to use sexuality and charisma as artistic tools. That's what bonded them in that brief meeting in '87, recognition of a kindred spirit. The advice Prince gave Michael about the stage being the only place of freedom, about not letting anyone take away your power, about making sure people saw everything you had to offer beyond just sexuality, that advice was sound. Michael tried to follow it. He didn't always succeed because the pressures of fame and personal demons made it difficult, but he tried. And in his best performances, in the Kick-era videos and the massive stadium shows, you can see him applying what Prince taught him. Complete freedom on stage, total commitment to the performance, sexuality as art, not cheap exploitation. If Michael and Prince could see their legacies now, almost 3 decades and 8 years after their respective deaths, they'd see fans who still celebrate their work, who still recognize their genius, who still feel the power of their performances. They'd see new generations discovering their music and being blown away. They'd see their influence in artists who came after them. They succeeded in creating something that lasted beyond their 2 short lives. The 1987 meeting between Prince and Michael Hutchence was brief but profound. A master sharing wisdom with a student, an artist who'd broken all the rules, encouraging another artist to do the same. 2 men who understood the power of stage presence and sexual charisma, who knew what it meant to be reduced to your appearance when you had so much more to offer. Prince saw something special in Michael that day. He tried to prepare him, to guide him, to give him tools for the journey ahead. Michael treasured that advice, carried it with him, tried to live up to it. And when both of their journeys ended too soon, what remained was the music, the performances, the legacy of 2 artists who refused to be anything less than completely themselves.